Welcome, everybody. Good evening. And thank you for joining the Delaware River Frack Ban Coalition tonight for the truth about fracking's harms to human health. And I'm Tracy Carluccio, Deputy Director of Delaware Riverkeeper Network. But tonight I'm representing the Delaware River Frack Ban Coalition. Our featured presenter tonight is Dr. Kathy Nolan, and I'm going to be introducing her in a moment. But what I'd like to start out first is to set some context about why we feel this is such an important moment to talk about and highlight the health harms from fracking. First, the frack gas industry is trying to ram through more frack gas wells. And across Pennsylvania and Appalachia, throughout the Marcellus and Utica Shale, we see this happening. The industry has not had the capital investment incentive to develop more wells because they don't have enough market for the gas. There's just not enough people that have wanted to use this gas that they would produce. And also the gas wells that do exist are petering out. So they really do want to develop more wells, so they're looking for more markets, and that's why we feel this pressure. Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania has recently said that developing natural gas to fuel new data center development is quote unquote sustainable. And we're going to show why that's not true tonight. Analysts are predicting that dirty fuel, primarily frack gas, we're going to be powering these centers. And that means more frack gas wells in order to meet that need, that invented need. And developers are pushing for liquefied natural gas LNG export, where they command higher prices. And that too means more more fracked wells. The LNG is being championed right now by Pennsylvania's new Senator McCormick, who says that he wants to, there was an announcement in a commentary, turn the Delaware River ports into an LNG export hub. And our electricity costs are skyrocketing. And it's going to get worse if natural gas is developed as an energy source. The heaviest price being paid by Pennsylvanians, the devastating damage to human health. People are carrying this unjust burden. They even want to overturn the ban on fracking in the Delaware River Watershed to expand fracking's geographic footprint. That's being led by our new Congressman Rob Bresnahan in Pennsylvania, who is using his platform to say that he wants to unleash the molecules of natural gas in the Delaware River watershed to make them available. And as far as that's concerned, we see a lot of energy behind that from those interests who would make money on it. So special interest represented by some of our elected officials are pushing this. And if they get their way, there's going to be a fracking frenzy. Of course, the public, communities, Delaware River Frack Ban coalitions, many of the organizations, many of you have worked on this issue for years, would never let that ban on fracking be overturned that was adopted by the Delaware River Basin Commission in 2021, following 10 years, 11 years of a moratorium. But we have to stand up and we have to speak about it. And that's why we're here and why we feel that it's so important at this moment to emphasize what fracking really has meant for people who are living with it. So at this moment, I'm going to turn it over to our guest speaker, and that's Dr. Kathy Nolan, and she's representing tonight her organization, Catskill Mountain Keeper, and also New York chapter of the Pennsylvania Physicians for Social Responsibility. I want everyone to know the background of Kathy, of Dr. Nolan. And also Taylor Jaffe, also from Catskill Mountain Keeper, is here with us tonight. And I have a bio for her. So let me just bear with me for a minute while I explain that Kathleen Nolan, MD, MSL, is the Senior Research Director at Catskill Mountain Keeper, working out of their Woodstock, New York office and focusing on issues related to the health impacts of fracking and fossil fuel infrastructure, in addition to spearheading their work in the Catskills High Peaks region. Kathy majored in philosophy and theology at St. Louis University and graduated with honors, going on to pursue a medical degree along with a master's of studies in law from Yale. Following a residency in pediatrics and fellowship training in clinical research design, Kathy worked at the Hastings Center, writing and teaching on diverse topics in bioethics before coming to the Catskills in 1989 to pursue residential training at the Zen Buddhist monastery. In 2011, Kathy joined Mountain Keeper staff and co-founded Concerned Health Professionals of New York, which, along with the Pennsylvania Physicians for Social Responsibility and the New York chapter, have published the compendium, which is in its 9th edition. Kathy was elected to the Ulster County Legislature in 2017 and in 2021, and since 2019 has served as the president of the board of Samadhi Center, a mindfulness-based recovery outreach center in Kingston, New York. Kathy volunteers with several area nonprofit organizations. I don't know where she gets the time, including the Catskill Heritage Alliance and the Shandaken Community Gardens. And is the volunteer board president of the New York chapter of Physicians for Social Responsibility. So thank you, Kathy. And I just wanted everyone to know as we go into Q&A, who you've been listening to. Now, Taylor Jaffe is the program manager of Catskill Mountain Keeper, and she's with us tonight too to be available for any questions and answers that she feels that she wants to chime in on. So she works with Catskill Mountain Keeper to protect the Catskill Park and the entire region by supporting policies and strategies that safeguard its natural environment and promote sustainable, resilient, and just communities. From transportation access to understanding the distribution of environmental benefits and burdens, Taylor brings a community-focused lens to her work at the Catskill Mountain Keeper. Prior to working for Mountain Keeper, Taylor graduated with a BA from Colgate University with honors in political science. In addition to environmental justice work, Taylor has a passion for sustainable agriculture and food systems and enjoys writing and performing music. And we are very, very lucky to have both of them here with us tonight. Kathy?
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I really appreciate the people who have signed up and come in to join us for this look at this topic. Um, this is a pleasure for me, and I do work for Catskill Mountain Keeper, and I serve as a volunteer with both the Physicians for Social Responsibility New York and Concerned Health Professionals of New York. And all of these organizations support me. The Concerned Health Professionals and PSR New York are the primary authors of the Compendium of Scientific, Medical, and Media Findings demonstrating risks and harms of fracking and associated gas and oil infrastructure. We published the first edition of that in 2014 when there were about 400 studies of fracking across the US and around the world. And now there are over 2,000. We're in our 9th edition. So the next slide. I have been charged with presenting the truth about the causal role of fracking in human illness. And so that what I've put on this slide is the truth that I want us to examine here. And my claim is that fracking harms all human tissue and organ systems, and more than human, probably other biologic systems I could include there as well. And so that's really the headline. This is my truth for now. What I'd like to do is see if it could become a widely recognized truth, maybe even a universally recognized truth. But I'll start with the honest question. Do fracking activities, oil and gas extraction, storage, transport, and use cause adverse health impacts? Next slide. So if we're going to talk about causes, we have to know what we're thinking about in terms of causality, because there's many different types of causes. You can talk about a necessary cause, which is where a result is seen every time. The result is seen only in the presence of a certain activity. You can have a sufficient cause where the result is always seen, it always follows a certain activity. Approximate cause is whatever is happening immediately prior to the result of interest, and that may or may not make a tighter causal link. There's actually also a thing, Aristotle talked about final cause, but that's really more a philosophical or a theological question of what is the purpose of an activity. And what I want to talk most about tonight are multiple causes, or what's called multifactorial causality. Those are what we see in most complex systems. You can see necessary or sufficient causality in certain chemical systems and some biological systems, but when you have a certain amount of complexity, then you move into the possibility that there are multiple causes for a specific result. So the next slide. So we need some way of kind of sorting things out when we have all these potential ways to think about causality. And for a necessary cause, we look to empirical data. Generally, you remove the activity that you think might be causal, and if the result vanishes, then that is likely a necessary cause. You had it in place and you take it away, and the result disappears. Similarly, for a sufficient cause, you can look to empirical data. You add a certain activity into a mix of circumstances, and if a result occurs, then you can say, that addition of that element was sufficient to cause the result of interest. Proximate causes are kind of a subset of that. You basically review the time course, and you can run that forward, or you can also look back. Final cause, as I mentioned, is more a philosophical or theological inquiry, so we're going to leave that for another discussion. But multiple causes, multifactorial causality, you have to do a certain kind of reasoning. It's more inductive rather than deductive. And it's inductive in the sense that it brings together data, but also an analysis of the systems that are in play, and also certain probabilities of what is happening in a certain system. So inductive analysis is sometimes also called comparative analysis. It has elements of pattern recognition, and the probabilities that we're talking about are the likelihood of certain factors contributing to the results of interest. This kind of reasoning, multifactorial causality, is often what we put in various professional realms. We look to professionals for a certain experience in terms of their review of the data and of the systems at play, and to help synthesize more experience, a broader range of experience, into an analysis of the likelihood that a particular activity or element is causal. Next slide. There's also a way we can talk about causality in terms of how confident are we that we have identified the appropriate level of causality. And I put here a few examples. There may be others. In criminal law and civil law, they're what are called evidentiary standards. In criminal law, you probably heard on TV shows and in movies, beyond a shadow of a doubt. I'm not sure that's actually a legal standard. I'm not a lawyer. Do have some legal training, but I'm not a lawyer. But the usual criminal standards, beyond a reasonable doubt. And in civil law or tort law, it's often the preponderance, the evidence, or you could say it's more likely than not that this element is causal. In some circumstances, there's also a clear and convincing evidence. None of those standards really are ported well into other types of conversations. They seem to have their realm mainly in the particular field of law. But I like to try to bring some similar kinds of considerations into what are we doing in terms of our social policies? And what level of standard do we have to change what we're doing at the societal level? I certainly use it in terms of clinical recommendations. Try to help people understand whether I feel that the clinical recommendation that I'm making is beyond a reasonable doubt. If I'm very, very certain, or am I, is it more likely than not? Or do I think there's a possibility, but it's not necessarily more likely than not? So we have to take those kinds of recommendations and temper them with individual preferences so that an individual can choose. And individual preferences are, they have a lot of elements, but for this discussion, there are people that are more risk aversive and others that are more risk tolerant or risk taking in their approach to their own health and what they might want. So, how do we apply these kinds of consideration to the causal role of fracking in regard to human health? Next slide. So, when I first encountered the existence of fracking, which was starting to take place in Pennsylvania and had been taking place out in Western states and Midwestern states before I was aware of it in 2011, 2012, I thought, well, this is a new technology. We have to just figure out how to manage it. But let's try to understand, how it works. So I and colleagues looked at the chemistry of the components that were being used in the fracking wells, the toxicology of those components. Then it turned out that it's not only what the industry uses to put down into a well in order to do a fracking, but also what comes back out of the well, which has more toxic agents than went in. And then the routes of those contaminants getting to people or animals, the environment, the pathophysiology once somebody is exposed to an agent, the epidemiology in terms of how often you might see an adverse result. And then what became very important to me was looking at individual cases with the response to interventions, such as removing the exposure, or what was easier to do in many instances was to remove the person or the animals from the exposure and see if removing the exposure would remove the symptoms that the person was bringing. So this then became part of, all right, what probabilities, what level of confidence can I have that in any individual person or in any individual community that the activity of fracking, when introduced, is having a causal role in the onset of physical symptoms and signs. So the data that healthcare professionals look at and scientists looked at for sorting this out begin with what I described, a case history. An individual person may come and say, I have this issue. And if you have several case histories, then you can call it a series. And that becomes known as anecdotal evidence. There's something happened here more than just in one individual. From that, you can try to develop a way of sorting out causality. In trying a new medication, we would do a randomized controlled study. Randomized, so we put people into groups without any bias of trying to get the best patients in one arm of a trial and try to prove something where we're marching towards a particular conclusion we'd like to reach. And controlled and anonymized or masked, used to be called blinded, that I don't know which wing of a trial a person might be in. We can't do that practically with a technology like fracking. It would be immoral, for one thing, I believe, even back in 2011, 2012, to randomize somebody to receive an exposure to fracking materials or to that activity in their community. And also it's just, the industry are the ones who decide where they're going to go. And I doubt we would have ever been able to have the kind of cooperation that they would need. So what we have to do instead is what are called case control studies. You take a community or an individual and you compare who is exposed to fracking and compare that individual or community to a similarly situated individual or community who is not exposed. Sometimes you can do that by using the time course of an event and say, in 2010, this person was not exposed, but now in 2015, they are exposed. And can we compare the difference in their health before and after? Those types of studies give us a lot of information, but are often challenged because they show correlations rather than causality. So to try to tighten those up in a situation like this, where you want to know with more certainty, is there a causal role of fracking? You can do things like look to see if there's a dose response curve, where in taking a medication, if you have a higher dose of the medication, you expect a greater response in terms of the reaction to the medication. And it looked early on, and increasingly, we can see that there are dose response correlations that happen in terms of people who are exposed to a small amount of fracking in their community, as opposed to people with much more intensive fracking, or people who are much closer to the site of the fracking activity, or comparing them with people who are far further away. And you can look at exposed groups over time. And in a few instances, we have some natural experiments, I would call them, that help us to get close to that gold standard of the randomized controlled mass study, either because some groups are exposed and then for some reason the exposure is taken away. And you can, as I said, see whether or not the symptoms and signs then go away. Or in farm animals back in a decade ago, we had instances in which pastures of farm animals were exposed to fracking in their water, where neighboring farm animals on the same farm had a different water source or a different circumstance and were not exposed. And so we actually could see exposure results versus lack of exposure. There's a study that I'll give you more specifics on in a minute that actually gave us a timeline analysis like that, because in 2014, New York decided through regulatory means to ban fracking. And so fracking never came into New York. In Pennsylvania, the opposite decision was taken. And so there's the possibility of where New York has counties that sit right on the northern border of Pennsylvania. You can look at the southern counties of New York and look at the northern counties of Pennsylvania. One group was assigned to the fracking wing of this great social experiment, great in the sense of large, this horrible social experiment. And in New York, people were assigned to the group of not having the fracking, despite the fact that there was shale and a desire of companies to come in and frack the shale and people who wanted the shale. So the people and the circumstances seem very similar between those southern counties in New York and the northern counties in Pennsylvania. Next slide. So my professional level review and I think scores of research findings, actually thousands of papers, support in the claim that I made at the onset that fracking's causal role in human illness is that it harms all tissue and organ systems. It doesn't do that in every instance. There are lots of factors that determine whether somebody's exposed, whether they're particularly susceptible, but looked at as in a broad lens, every tissue and organ system that I have looked to see whether there was credible evidence for fracking harming that system, and sometimes harming it very severely, I've been able to find it. So I particularly like this open source slide, which shows both male and female anatomy. We can go to the next slide. What I'm going to try to do in the remaining time is quickly because we want to get to some questions and answers and some other issues. I want to talk about each of the places where I can find an illustrative case or research paper to address each of these 10 systems. Um, Fracking increases overall morbidity and mortality. It increases cancer by harming cellular repair, increases diseases of the immune system, and harms the respiratory system, cardiovascular system, reproductive system, including birth outcomes and perinatal health, dermatologic systems such as skin and mucous membranes, the endocrine system, the gastrointestinal system, genital urinary system, nervous system, and psychosocial well-being. You'd think I was making it up, but I am not. These are the systems where we can show very good research to indicate how badly people can be harmed by exposure. Next slide. So in terms of overall morbidity and mortality, uh, there have been studies going back over 10 years to high injury and on-the-job mortality rates in workers in the gas and oil fields. That should tell us something. And that also is something that is persisting to today. There are many studies, but I chose one because it's a very, very large study. Longji et al. In 2022 documented out of more than 15 million Medicare recipients, 65 years of age and older, that living near to and downwind of fracking sites was associated with early mortality. And my citations here are just what I thought you might need to kind of get a picture of this research in your head. We can provide you with more scientific citations later if you need them for any purpose. Next slide. In terms of cancer and the immune system, most of what has been found has related to the hematologic system, leukemias and lymphomas. A very nice study from University of Pennsylvania in 2023, very well done study, I mean, of children living within 1 mile or more of hydraulically fractured wells had approximately 5 to 7 times the chance of developing lymphoma. And ALL, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, in 2022, a study demonstrated that the odds for children of developing ALL, if they lived within 2 kilometers of their birth residence, was near fracking wells during certain periods of gestation, were elevated. And 2 kilometers is just around a mile, I think. 10 kilometers is 6.2 miles, and leukemia levels were shown to be elevated that far out in that study. And that's particularly worrisome because oil workers can sometimes show an adult form of ALL if they're working in a very confined space, like on a well pad out at sea. So these findings match what we see in other settings as well. This ANCA associated vasculitis is anti-neutrophil cytoplasmic antibody associated vasculitis. It's very rare, but it was very interesting to me that that is increased in incidence in areas of fracking activity in West Virginia. Somebody studied it and showed that. Next slide. The respiratory system is one of the systems that I think most people associate with potential harms from fracking, and that's quite reasonable. The studies that I have here are primarily asthma, but fracking does cause other respiratory illnesses, just increases the number of times people show up in hospital emergency rooms or get hospitalized for respiratory disease. But I am trained as a pediatrician, and the impacts on children with asthma is quite profound. Study from the University of Pittsburgh in 2023, 4 to 5 times the number of ER visits and hospitalizations for asthma for individuals living near unconventional wells, fracking wells during the production phase. Hospitalizations are increased as well. that is shown going back for most of the last decade. And it's across all realms of asthma. And people can die from asthma, but people who live with asthma have a terrible, terrible time. And for children, it's a primary cause of missed school days. In adults, it can cause trouble getting to work as well. It can cause absence from work and a need to take sick days. Next slide. So this first study here, this heart attack and heart failure rates, is the study that I mentioned, comparing southern counties in New York with northern counties in Pennsylvania from 2023. The rates of heart attack and heart failure remain stable in the unfracked areas of southwestern New York, but they increased in comparable areas, fracked areas of northern Pennsylvania. So that's a case control design. You're comparing them kind of after the fact, but it's very close to the design of a randomized trial. Those findings that are showing up in that study in Pennsylvania are not unusual, that they are usual. Other studies show that heart attacks, acute myocardial infarction, and hospitalization and death from heart attacks are increased in counties that have 100 or more wells. Many counties have far, far greater than 100 wells. And hospitalization among individuals with heart failure has been documented as well, increased across all fracking phases and levels of fracking activity. We won't get into those details tonight. The next slide. So this is, I think, 7 studies all showing very similar things in terms of reproductive health and birth outcomes. Infants whose mothers are exposed during gestation have small for gestational age, decreased birth weight, premature birth, congenital anomalies. I'm going to highlight that on the next slide, and early infant deaths. And the mothers are sicker during the pregnancy. That last 2 citations there, the gestational hypertension and eclampsia, that is the mother having a difficult pregnancy and eclampsia condition that can cause injury to the mother or death, and as well to the infant. And high-risk pregnancy in general. You're going to have more women going in and being determined to have a high-risk pregnancy if they are in an area with substantial amounts of fracking. The next slide. I was particularly concerned about congenital abnormalities, malformations that might be associated with fracking. That has been shown in good studies. In the University of Oklahoma in 2018 showed congenital neural tube defects were significantly increased in prevalence among children whose birth residence was in 2 miles of a fracking site. And congenital heart defects have also been reported. The first clinical complaint that came to me regarding fracking was a parent of an adult child who called me because the adult had the mother, the daughter of the mother had had a child, a grandchild, with gastroschisis, which is an opening in the abdominal wall at the time of birth. And which is very unusual. I saw a couple in all my training, and the obstetrician for that individual told her that that was the 5th or the 6th one that he had seen. And so she called and she said, "Does that sound right to you that all these children are having this, this congenital malformation?" And no, it did not sound right to me. I knew from genetics and developmental biology classes, gastroschisis is one of it's kind of an easy to cause malformation. And so it was a big warning flag for me that was reported to me from 2011. So next slide. And we got just a couple more, and then we can turn to what we're going to do about this. The skin system and mucous membranes are really badly impacted by fracking in many instances, and people from Pennsylvania who had fracked wells near them coming up to New York to help us fight against banning fracking would often have burn-like lesions on their arms and face that they associated with fracking, and that got better if they went away from their homes. That's also documented in the literature. Itching and burning of eyes, dry skin, lightheadedness, dizziness, diseases of the genitourinary tract, and chronic rhinosinusitis, one of the big advocates in Pennsylvania against fracking and the spreading of fracking waste on roads, has terrible sinus polyps and has had multiple operations that she associates directly with fracking. And the evidence is there to back her up. Next slide. The endocrine and genitourinary system, I only found one, but it was pretty severe, bladder and thyroid cancer. We do know that many of the fracking chemicals are endocrine disruptive compounds. So I think we might need to look for other ways to document illness in this organ system. Next slide. The nervous system, neurologic symptoms, including migraine headaches, were increased within 10 kilometers of wells. So that's 6+ miles. They also are neurologic, muscular, respiratory symptoms increased with increased well density and hospitalizations. I have been involved in reports of children with seizures that were treated with anti-seizure medications and whose seizures went away when they went to visit their grandmother and would come back when they lived in their homes that were near a compressor station, and that were worse when clouds of odorous yellow gas would come from that compressor station. So let's go to the next slide, which I think starts to talk about what you do when you're getting to, oh no, the psychosocial well-being. Our own psychosocial well-being is injured by fracking when we see how much evidence there is, and this activity is going on all around the country and around the world. So people have depressive syndromes, reach out to to self-medicate, stress, sleep disorders, I don't think made it onto the slide. And all of these symptoms are increased in proximity to wells. So these are really horrible studies that I'm showing you. I mean, tragic studies that I'm showing you, unless there's something we can do about it. So next slide. At the individual level, what most people who lived out west, and I think in Pennsylvania, are being told is avoid exposures. So you watch your local air quality and your water quality, and you try to avoid situations where you'll be exposed to outdoor air and water contaminants. You close your windows and run a HEPA filter air purifier when the air quality is poor or when you feel sick. Drink bottled water. Most water filter systems will not remove all of the things you need to remove from water that's been contaminated by fracking elements. So a reverse osmosis system will do that, but it's extremely expensive. You can get notified when there's poor air quality. You can test your indoor radon levels, because especially in areas like Pennsylvania and the Marcellus Shale, where I am up in New York, there's radon in the shale, and so the radon comes up with the fracked oil and gas. And do what I have recommended to several people. You can relocate. You can send your children to the grandmother, but then you want to live with your children. So if you want to live with your children and you don't want them to be sick, you don't have many choices if there is no public policy level intervention. if you are in a situation where you're exposed like this, the Environmental Health Project in Pennsylvania has done the best work that I know of to bring all these kind of interventions that would allow you to stay in your home. But please also become part of the effort to make policy changes. We need to minimize, or I would say, eliminate these types of exposures. The attempt to regulate emissions and deal with spills, um, deal with flaring and planned releases, increase setbacks is really not fully protective. I brought to you some information that shows that setbacks might need to be as much as 2 or 5 or more miles from wells. That's not being done anywhere in the country. Even a quarter of a mile is not being done in many parts of the country. So I've been a part of efforts to ban fracking and fracking related infrastructure and activities in New York, in the Delaware River Basin, across the United States, in Canada, and in South America, and in Ireland. And I would go further if there are people that are trying to keep themselves and their neighbors from being exposed in these ways. So I'll stop there and really appreciate your attention over this period of time.
So thank you. And Kathy, I greatly appreciate your level of expertise and your presentation here tonight. It's really enlightening. Thank you so much. And we're going to be going into questions and answers here. So at this time, we're going to open it up to questions and answers, and Annika is going to fish them out of the Q&A for us and pose them, and then we will all feel, that we can answer, chime in as we go along. Okay, Annika, are you ready?
Yep. I say I will apologize for our panelists. I feel like these are all questions so far that I feel like everybody can answer. So it will be tough to direct it, / if I direct it to anybody, please feel free to add on. I'll just try to parse it out. But I think, Kathy, if you want to speak to one of the first questions is, how has the technology changed in the last 10 years?
The technology of fracking has evolved a little bit. If you had an industry person here, they probably say a lot. They try to change up their fluids and their methods, and there's been some efforts to bring some new types of fracking into New York. Fracking with carbon dioxide, for example, gels, propane. I think more has changed in terms of our technologies to be able to detect the leaks and spills and contamination that's coming from the industry. That has been amazing. We now can use satellites and planes flying in space to measure how much methane and other compounds are being released. FLIR cameras, I think somebody was asking about. It's a type of camera that will show up the methane and the aromatic hydrocarbons in the emissions from a site that on visible inspection, just with the naked eye, looks like it doesn't have anything. So our technologies to reveal how much contamination there is of air and to a lesser extent water are improving over time. And that's what's being reported quite a bit in the literature that I'm citing has been growing so much over the past 10 years.
I would just add to that there has been some technological changes that have resulted in deeper well bores and longer horizontal well bores. They've developed the technology now to make these horizontal well bores that go off of the vertical well bore to be as long as 4 and 5 miles. Just, when it began, when fracking began in the late 2000s and, in the early part of like 2010 and 2011, they were using, for instance, 3 million gallons to frack a well. Now they can use 11 million gallons or more, up to 20 million gallons. And that's a function of how far the well bore actually goes. So what we're seeing in this, what they call a technological advancement, is a labyrinth, a lattice of horizontal well bores going out from the vertical well bore that you see at the pad, but underground, all of these well bores are reaching out, some of them at, great distances. And that means they need a lot more water, a lot more chemicals, and a lot more proppants in order to get that fluid to frack the gas out of the deep geology. So, and then in the end, you have more wastewater that comes back up. So that technological advance has made fracking a lot worse. And you look at a gas well and you see a pad, but in terms of what its impact is, it's multiple times what you would imagine by just looking at one well pad. So we have another question.
Yeah, actually I will build off the bring up of the FLIR cameras question. So Kathy or all, and then this I'm gonna parse out. Asked, there was a question of, is it helpful for everyday citizens to have a FLIR camera? And then I'll just tag to expose invisible gas releases, and then I'll just tag on to that for Tracy and Taylor too. Maybe if you both would like to speak to how, if you don't have a FLIR camera, then maybe what are some other things you could do that would be helpful in a scenario, to kind of expose what's going on or know what's going on around you.
I think FLIR cameras have been very helpful. Earthworks has done studies and published YouTube videos of what most compressor stations and storage tanks are letting off all the time. So you can use what's already available if you don't have a FLIR camera or access to one. If you can get it and you bring it in, if you show those photos or videos to a regulatory organization in your community, it's very powerful. It's a way to make visible the invisible. And when people can see it, then they can have a harder time denying it.
The only thing I would add is that I would call Chris Trujillo at Physicians for Social Responsibility in Pennsylvania. She's going around to well pads and she is documenting these emissions with FLIR cameras. And there are others who have done this in Pennsylvania and have really laid a foundation for this type of science in order to actually get data. The industry doesn't want us to have this data, but people are stepping up and getting it. In terms of other strategies, I would, in addition to calling on those who do have FLIR cameras, we need to complain when we smell something. If you smell something, say something. And we need to complain to our municipal government, to our elected representatives, to the Pennsylvania Department of Health or whatever state you're in. You need to complain, because a lot of times that's how a study begins. They hear about something and then there's a more in-depth analysis done.
I'll just add on to that. Complain, 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 document. If you're finding that you're having more doctor's visits, that's something that can certainly be shared with your representatives. And certainly, I don't want folks to forget the power of community. So talk to the folks around you as well.
Oh, you need to open up your mic.
There you go. Thank you. So building off of that, and I feel like all three of you could also answer this one. And I think from your different state expertise or expertise on municipal, local ways like that. This question is, what are the reporting requirements? So if a new fracking activity goes in near me, how will I be notified? Do we find out far enough ahead to really fight it?
That's tough. Very few states have good reporting requirements. And I forgot to mention in talking about causality that there is an approach called the precautionary principle, which says that instead of having to prove that something causes a problem, you should have to prove you don't cause a problem before you introduce something. We do not have that with technology in communities in the United States. We do have it a little bit with medications, as I mentioned. There's a process that you have to prove that a medication will not hurt people before you start using it in medicine. So I see, how much people have to, pharmaceutical companies have to go through to bring a safe product. Why don't we have something like that for these socially intrusive activities. And a lot of it is that they started, back in the 1800s, and have, people took it for granted. And when they were spread way out, maybe it didn't seem like they were hurting anything. But now they're being done definitely near population centers, and definitely we know. If you don't know what the status is of your county or state in regard to a fracking ban, that it might be what you can work on. So in New York, what we did was we got a lot of counties to pass county level bans, which you can do in New York because the state law allows that. And by the time they were looking at it at the state level, the counties had already taken most of the available fracking land off the table. So that's how you could know that fracking is not going to come in. Otherwise, you can look at whether or not there's shale in your area. And if there is, I think you should be organizing because somebody will be coming for it at some point.
I would just add that usually the first place would be at the municipal level. So it does require some vigilance on the part of residents to keep on top of what's happening on the agenda at your municipal government. But there are organizations like Protect PT and many organizations throughout Pennsylvania who are concentrating on their regions and help people find out when an application for a well is going to come in. Also, by municipal regulations being adopted that require a level of analysis and disclosure to the public of a municipality, that can help too in order to make sure that people know what's going on before it's too late. Once they go to Pennsylvania DEP for a permit, then it does appear in the Pennsylvania Bulletin. Unfortunately, who sits there and reads the Pennsylvania Bulletin? So again, we need to make sure that you're connected to an organization in your area, or you can sign up personally to get the Pennsylvania Bulletin and look at it. But that does require a public notice in the Pennsylvania Bulletin, so there is a way for that to happen. Unfortunately, the reporting requirements once a well is in Pennsylvania anyway are miserable. And conventional wells, I see somebody mention this, they have very few production and waste reports that they file. And what happens when you don't file them? Very little. Slap on the wrist. Maybe they'll do better next year. There just is not a lot of oversight or will on the part of the agencies, particularly Department of Environmental Protection, to stay on top of it. But Taylor, did you want to add to that at all?
No, I think that was perfect. I just want to highlight, being vigilant at the local municipal level. A lot happens at our town planning boards. So I just really recommend that folks get on those mailing lists.
And there's some good information showing up in the chat for the people that have it open, that there's a site that somebody dropped in for looking at upcoming permits in Pennsylvania. And also some modern technology, to go back to that question, to put a little mini FLIR camera, an OGI, on your phone, or to have a application on your phone that can detect odors. And the purple canisters are relatively inexpensive way if you think there's something in your community, whether it's fracking or some other source of contamination, to look at air quality.
Thank you. Now we're almost to 8 o'clock, and we try to always stop on time to honor people's time that they've committed to attend the webinar. I wonder, and we do have a couple closing slides because we have some specific things we want to recommend that people can do. But do we have a lot more questions, Annika? Maybe we can try to answer them, by email afterwards. Yeah, there's a lot more questions.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions. So I think we'd be hard, and many of them would be hard pressed to have a good, concise answer to with how passionate you all are. So we should go to the closing slides.
Right. So we will do that. I did notice one that asked about, what are the pollutants that come out for fracking? And I just want to say real quickly that there's been more than 200 airborne chemical contaminants detected around gas and gas wells that have been fracked. And That's one pathway of pollution. Another pathway of pollution is through water. And we find that through frackouts. And there's a new study by John Stoltz that looks at the connection of groundwater and water supply contamination by frackouts, which is an incident that occurs at a gas well, and also through the normal operation, through spills, and then through wastewater. Because when the wastewater comes back up from the well, it is highly polluted. And it is also radioactive because the Marcellus Shale is known to be highly radioactive. So you have radioactivity, heavy metals, and of course the fluids that went in, and it went into the well to frack it in the first place. I mean, EPA has identified over 600 chemicals that are used, and in New York, when they did their study, they found even more. So, we're talking about a lot of chemicals, and of the ones that are there, there are at least hundreds or at least 100 or more that have been identified as toxic in the area where wells are being drilled. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I think probably other people are thinking about, gee, what are these chemicals that are causing all these horrible effects that Kathy has outlined for us? So moving on now to our next slide, I'd like to just, make a couple suggestions here. Well, what can we do? I think at this point we're all wondering, can we stop fracking? I mean, what's it going to take? Where is sanity going to prevail and this insane fracking frenzy going to be pulled back? And how do we engender the political will in order to make this happen? And we have tried several times in Pennsylvania, for instance, to get a moratorium and have failed. But one thing I would like to ask, and I'm asking those who are still that are here, and we still have a good number of people here. Thank you for the great turnout that everyone has, come out with tonight. Um, should we start a petition drive for a moratorium on fracking in Pennsylvania? And I'd like everyone who can, please answer in the chat. We're going to ask this in our follow-up email that we send out to everybody that will have a lot of links for things you can do, or the organizations that you can connect with, and also a recording of tonight. And also we'll repeat this question. Do we want, as a public, to start a petition drive for a moratorium on fracking in Pennsylvania? And of course, a petition is not just a petition. We're going to start a petition. A petition means you have to have a plan for what to do with it and what is the moratorium going to be tied to. So it's a big question. Just put yes if you think you should. We would appreciate that. It's sort of a poll that we're taking. Okay, next slide, please. So there is one thing that we're doing in Pennsylvania and all 4 states in the Delaware River Watershed. So that's Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and Delaware. And we have asked that people sign a pledge to defend the Delaware River and from fracking. And that pledge has been actively out there. The pledge basically says, I take this pledge of resistance and protection in solidarity to uphold the ban on high volume hydraulic fracking, and to resist all the harmful activities that fossil gas and oil development brings. And we already have about 2,500 signatures on this petition, and we're circulating it around. And we would like people who want to make sure that a special fracking interest and their front people don't come in and take over the Delaware River Watershed. So we want to make sure that ban stays in place, and we want it to spread. We feel that fracking should be banned throughout the United States. But let's start with Pennsylvania, because we are right here, we are a microcosm of what happens when fracking happens where people live. We're the second greatest natural gas producer in the nation now, second only to Texas, and we're paying the price for it. Next slide, please. And the pledge will be is right in the chat there. It'll be sent out again when we send out our follow-up email. I just want to make sure everyone knows that we have a lot of organizations that are part of our Delaware River Frack Ban and Climate Action Coalition. Burke's Gas Truth, Catskill Mountain Keeper, Clean Water Action New Jersey, Damascus Citizens for Sustainability, Delaware River Keeper Network, Environment New Jersey, Food and Water Watch, League of Women Voters of Delaware, and many other groups have been active over the years and were absolutely instrumental instrumental in getting the ban that we have in place throughout the Delaware River watershed. So we just want to make sure everyone knows these are groups, and we put the links in the chat so you can contact them directly. There's also great resources that are shared by organizations like Frack Tracker, Physicians for Social Responsibility, the Environmental Health Project. These are also great resources for you to get in touch with, and we have those links in the chat as well. I also like to just mention before we close that for those that are interested, on November 4th, there will be a legislative hearing on the proposed Penn America LNG export facility to be held at Chester City Hall in Pennsylvania by Representative Vitale's House Environment Committee. It's at 10 a.m. It's in person. It'll also be live streamed over the YouTube, over the closed channel that the legislature keeps on their website. So we will put that into the chat and also into the follow-up email if you'd like to attend. This is one of the active LNG proposals in the Delaware River watershed. The other one that we've been fighting for the last 6 years is on the New Jersey side, called the Gibbstown LNG export terminal. Also, Delaware Riverkeeper Network is hosting a webinar on November 19th with Dr. John Stoltz, who will be discussing his recently released groundbreaking report on groundwater contamination by fracking in southwestern Pennsylvania. And finally, the Delaware River Frack Ban Coalition is planning another webinar before the end of the year on the economic implications of fracking or not fracking. So we want people to join that as well. It will be in December sometime, and we'll be in touch about that. But we believe that we can stop fracking. A Delaware Riverkeeper Network and our coalition has worked for this in the watershed, and we have worked and tried to get it in other places. We've worked alongside those organizations in New York to get the fracking ban that was adopted there in the last decade. But let's all pull together and think, how can we actually make it real? How can we stop this attack on us, this frack attack? And thank you very much, everybody, for joining here tonight. We had a wonderful bunch of registrants, and we had a wonderful turnout. Thank you, and thanks, Kathy, Taylor, Annika, and Peter, who is our IT guru. Thank you all, and good night.